Hello. Welcome to Foreignsics, the What is Life podcast where we make the uncomfortable comfortable. I'm your host, Zafreen. Thanks for being here today. As always, these thoughts and opinions are completely my own, and you're here to hopefully hear about life and maybe just want a space to feel heard and seen. And if not, no worries too. Just appreciate you being here. And for those listening, I am a first-generation Bengali American, and for today's episode is one that I think is really interesting. We're going to be talking about overcompensating in social activities when you are exhausted. And I think that's going to resonate with some people, something that I don't know if we really have honest conversations with ourselves about or even realize we're doing sometimes. Let's just jump into it. What do we kind of mean by this, right? Like, unless you're living under a rock, we all live in a very fast-paced world. And it's really easy to feel just the pressure of wanting to keep up with our peers. And we can get caught up in, this idea of what we call the rat race, where we feel like we need to measure up and stay ahead of everyone else, or we risk falling behind. It's not as black and white as that, and it's also the idea of the pressures that we put into ourselves, and really just paying attention to your social meter, right? Like, when it tells you you need a break and that you're overdoing it, it might be worth paying attention to that little voice. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that, right? Where from work, we are just feeling completely drained, due to a vicious cycle of working long hours, balancing multiple priorities, coping with different, dynamics. And a lot of times we might feel like in order to overcompensate for that, meaning feeling a little bit more like ourselves, we then need to engage in a ton of social activities. And in order to prove that we can still be productive, like still doing the things that we want to do and still have some sort of control in our lives. And this could mean something like, going out more frequently, hanging out with friends, saying yes to everything, overcommitting when we clearly do not have the time to be doing stuff. And all this really leads to temporary relief from exhaustion, because if it's not managed properly, it can actually lead to more burnout. And it's interesting, right? Because it's this idea of feeling like we need to make up for lost time, which can be extremely detrimental. And it's this pressure that's often seen in the form of just social obligations, expectations that require people to continually remain active and productive, truly despite their physical and mental state. It can be hard to resist that pressure because it often feels like there's a fear of looking like we're less than capable of doing things, or maybe we're not living up to the expectations we hold ourselves to or others might hold us to. And to be honest, that actually just is more detrimental to us because it actually just leads to more stress, more fatigue, more burnout, especially if we don't find a balance, right? Because it's like by just continuing to overwork yourself, I don't know, a lot of times we might think that we're overexhausted in one bucket of life. And so if we overdo in another bucket, that's going to make us feel fulfilled. When at the end of the day, we're just continually pouring out from an empty cup. And that doesn't help anybody, right? That's like you push through and you're like, I'm going to go get those drinks with people. I'm going to go hiking. I'm going to go do this rigorous workout. When in reality, maybe you just need to be still. For those that can relate, if you have a dog that likes to mark when you take them out on a walk, so even though they have nothing left to mark their scent, they'll just keep doing it. Eventually it stops being effective. I don't know, just something to think about. It's also like this pressure that can come from family, friends, work colleagues, even just strangers on social media. Like, we're constantly exposed to so much stimuli. And the pressure can also come from ourselves, right? Of just expectations that we need to keep up a certain standard when it's really just not realistic and we're just not being honest with ourselves. It's really important to be able to recognize those pressures and learn how to manage them in order to just truly live a more balanced life. Because I'd like to think that's what we all aim to achieve, is we just want to be balanced, fulfilled, and healthy. And if not, that's fine. You do you. And amongst all of that, right? Like, it's easier said than done. Like, it's such a challenge being able to find that joy while still taking care of yourself so you don't feel overburdened by all the demands that are placed on you, whether that's internally, externally, what have you. And so I think it's really important to recognize, when it comes to social expectations, like when are we imposing unrealistic expectations on ourselves? It's easy for us to buy into this idea that we need to be constantly connected and available, constantly on the go, but it's really not healthy or realistic in the long run, right? Like, we got to take steps to really figure out what matters the most to us and prioritize, so that way way we can just live our best lives. Truly. It's weird too, right? Because it's like you think work hard, play hard, and at face value, that sounds great and all. It's more like work smarter, play smarter. We were taught to be overachievers, taught to set ambitious goals as soon as we could talk, working hard, getting good grades, joining all sorts of extracurricular activities, and just taking on extra responsibilities, all in the name of achieving some sort of success in our community's eyes. And that can be so overwhelming. And for many of us, that actually trickled over into all facets of our lives, not just our studies and our work, but also our downtime, like our me time. And that pressure really came in all forms, right? Just comparing ourselves to others on social media, hearing stories of success from friends and families. I mean, I know everyone has some version of a comparison story of their achievements to someone else that they experienced by a relative. And whether you recognize it or not, you internalize that in some way. And that bleeds into you wanting to do the most when it comes to the joy in your life when that's not being fulfilled. And so when you're feeling exhausted and you feel like you aren't feeling that happiness portion and finding that balance, you can find yourself overcompensating and just doing too much. And, social media has pretty much just exacerbated these issues by just creating an environment where sometimes we feel like we need to one-up each other, or we feel like somebody might be doing something that we wish we could be doing, and so then we just cram everything all at once to make it happen. Or, maybe there's like a bunch of family functions you need to attend and you feel like you can't not be there because of X, Y, and Z reasons. I think it's if you find yourself in that situation and you find you can relate to that, maybe you might want to consider just taking a step back and to see what's actually worth your time. Because if you're just gonna be more exhausted than the day, it's just not worth it, right? Because it's like, I'm sure everyone knows, either whether they themselves say this or they know peers that say this, where if someone goes on vacation, they then feel like they have to take a vacation from vacation, which just defeats the purpose. Like, why are you going on vacation in the first place, right? Something to chew on. And I think something that kind of boils down to what we can do to kind of deal with this, right, is that idea of setting boundaries. And those boundaries can be both for our external pressures as well as the pressures we put on ourselves. And what I mean by that is, I know, I'll find myself this idea, like, I know I relate to this in that if, for me personally, going to the gym is a way that I relieve stress. It's a way that I stay grounded. And when I'm unable to do that because I'm just overexhausted from work, I really hate that. And it's so funny because I know for myself, like, a boundary that I've set for myself is, just having a real conversation when, like, for example, I can't maintain my routine of going to the gym. And because before, what I was doing is I would, go to work, be super exhausted, go to work and maybe like on a heavier week, be really exhausted both mentally and physically, and then push myself harder to then go to the gym. I just found that it just wasn't worth it. Like, in the moment, I was happy I made it to the gym. I wasn't, lifting my best. I wasn't, I was putting myself more at risk of, being injured, and then when I would come back home and like try to get rest and then wake up the next day and then rinse and repeat that, I was just becoming more and more irritable as the days went on. And I had to have a real conversation with myself where it's like, is it really worth, like, in this moment, what are things that I could sacrifice? Is it that I need to take off from work, or do I need to, maybe take off from going to the gym? And depending on the situation, I would sometimes choose, and depending on the situation, I would choose either of those options. I've done both, where I realize, like, work's being a lot. I do need to take a mental health day, or I do need to just take a moment, and so I'll take off. Or realizing that, my body truly needs a rest. And for me at that moment, working out, I needed to put that on pause. And so that was something where I just took like a day or two break, and that just made such a world of a difference. And it definitely sucked. It definitely took time to get used to that. And something I still struggle with sometimes, because then I'm like in this battle of like, all right, which one do I pick or choose? But it's like those little things that helped me to then set a boundary within myself to be like, all right, maybe I shouldn't do this, or, set a boundary within myself. And then externally, a boundary that I do is I actually block off time on my work calendar. So that way it gives me a moment to ease into the work day, or know that, or, let my colleagues know that during these certain times, try not to, schedule me, or like if you need to get in contact contact with me, like, know that I'm using that time for X, Y, and Z. What we talked about overall, right, throughout the season, boundaries allow us to have space both emotionally and physically. Because I don't know about you, but I can find myself being more short, more irritable, just not at ease because I feel like I'm just burning at both ends of the stick. And I think by us recognizing our personal limits, we can better navigate through societal norms and those pressures of feeling like we need to be constantly connected or on the go without feeling overwhelmed or resentful towards ourselves or others. Easier said than done. All of this requires active work and trial and error to see what works best for you because it's so subjective. What one person's idea of rest and rejuvenation is totally different than someone else's, right? And so it's just key in finding those activities that help you be able to have a break and isn't going to continue to add to your stress or exhaustion. There's so many different techniques, so many different stress management tools that exist. And I know there's some people that really are into like mindfulness meditation, or to help them go to sleep, they'll do a meditation, journaling, yoga, working out, hiking, being out in nature, hanging out with friends, grabbing a drink with friends, just watching TV, reading a book, playing with your dogs, cooking, cleaning. Like, it's such an endless list. By creating a routine and having those practices, it really just helps you gain awareness of your thoughts, your feelings, so that you can just do a little better at understanding what your triggers are and then how best to respond to them. And out of all of this, it's just learning how to pace yourself. Pacing yourself to understand what's going to give you enough me time built into your daily routines for those restorative activities, or for those restorative activities during the weekend that replenish you rather than deplete you further. The tools exist. We just have to know which ones to use to help maintain that balance, or even just to start creating that balance. I always feel like I'm always talking about with my friends or coworkers is that we always wish the weekend was longer. We always felt like there isn't enough time to do certain things. And so that's why it's just so important to manage that limited time and energy, because it can be challenging in today's society. It's just so fast paced, feeling like, there's people are moving at 500 miles an hour. I think, and it's very interesting that I think that's just culture that exists today, where it always feels like something needs your attention. And if you find yourself in a moment like that where you just feel super, super overwhelmed, I think it can be so helpful to just take a step back, assess what truly matters, and then prioritize those tasks or goals accordingly, right? So that way you don't feel overwhelmed by all those demands that are placed on you. And that can mean a plethora of things. That could be, learning to say no, delegating responsibilities, scheduling blocks of free time. Because by doing that, you're making sure that you have room built in for self-care within your daily routines. There's going to be times where it's not going to work. There's going to be times where everything that kind of just gets thrown out the window, and that's totally fine. It's just trying your best to maintain those routines. And then if you're finding that it's harder and harder for you to stick with it, then maybe reevaluating what you're doing and slowly making some tweaks to see what does work for you and what is sustainable. And a strong support system is so helpful to be able to manage that. Going to be so helpful to be able to find that balance, managing that stress, because a lot of times we can't do it by ourselves. There are people there that they're there for a reason, and just tapping into them to kind of understand what works. And it's interesting too, right? Because even just when you're setting those boundaries, a lot of times by setting boundaries, you're educating, whether it's your friends, yourself, your family members, what your personal needs are, and helping to create an environment of just some sort of understanding and acceptance that then allows you to take care of yourself without feeling guilty, shameful. And, it's just really pursuing those healthy habits as much as you can to maintain balance amidst just all the pressure and chaos of everyday life. I know one thing that I do that is helpful sometimes, especially when I'm feeling overwhelmed with different things, is if I see a phone call coming in from, my mom, depending on, when that call is coming in, I may actually not pick it up because I just won't be in the right mental space to have a good conversation. And what I mean by that is like me just not being irritable the whole time because I'm already exhausted. I then have to be on even more to be able to hold a conversation. And so for myself, I just won't pick up, and then I'll just call back when I am in a better mental state to be able, both mental and physical, to be able to hold a conversation. And we're such habitual creatures. We love routine. We love to be in some sense of control in our lives. And by creating those routines where you try to figure out how you can have those social activities, those moments where you don't feel like you can balance that feeling of missing out, it really is going to help you just feel more grounded. And the more you adhere to it, the easier it's going to feel and more automatic for you to feel like you have time for yourself. And by having that routine, it'll hopefully help you just feel both physically and mentally more refreshed and hopefully just rejuvenated. We truly just can't pour from an empty cup. And, this includes just the demands of all the pressures around us, internally and externally. And, just by understanding our own personal limits and creating healthy boundaries, with those around us, as well as with those within ourselves. I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down, that, sometimes we can be the problem. Like, hi, it's me, I'm the problem. Where we can better navigate through those social expectations without hopefully feeling overwhelmed or resentful in the process. And, just taking the time for ourselves to engage in restorative activities, figuring out what that means for us, and just being more mindful, and it can be so hard when you're in a place where you don't feel like, you have that balance. And I think that's the whole point, right? Is that you need to get there. And what are the steps and tools that you can do to figure out what's working and what's not? We can all find ourselves just being so caught up in this idea of constantly being on the move, constantly having to do too much because we feel like if we don't, we're going to be missing out. And that just means like missing out on our own happiness. And I think it's important for us to recognize that there is a way for you to still do that, still be able to achieve fulfillment and happiness without adding to the exhaustion that you might already be feeling from your other commitments. And this feeling of needing to make up for lost time can be so detrimental, and by taking small steps each day, each minute, whatever, really helps you regain control over your own well-being and hopefully ensures you're less likely to become overwhelmed by these various demands from constantly pushing ourselves beyond what is healthy and sustainable in the long run. Hopefully by taking small steps each day it's going to help us all feel like we can regain control over our own well-being and hopefully ensure in the future that we don't become overwhelmed by these demands from society ourselves and feel the need to constantly be pushing ourselves well beyond what is healthy and sustainable in the long run. There's nothing wrong with being an overachiever, having goals, and being ambitious. It's just finding that balance between rest and play and learning to pace yourself when you want to be able to do those social things that bring you joy. Right. Well, I think that's a good place for us to end today's episode. For those listening, appreciate you being here. Thank you for continuing to be a part of this journey. And yeah, hope you have a good one. All right. Bye.